Hi, my name's Kevlin Henney, and I'm going to talk to you about programming with guts. So, we're going to explain what that means. We're going to explain why it's important. But first of all, to introduce myself, my name is Kevlin Henney. I am based in Bristol in the UK. I'm an independent consultant and trainer. I do kind of workshops and training and sessions online and in person. You can find my contact details in these slides. In fact, it's fairly easy. You can just look for Kevlin or Kevlin Henney and you will find me. I'm on most platforms. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And I have written a number of things. I have a blog. The link is there on your screen. Those kind of reflect some of my current thoughts, as do other talks. Uh, I have a strong interest in software architecture and how we build systems overall, kind of the what we might call the philosophy of patterns. I pulled together this book a few years ago, a crowdsourced and open source book, 97 Things Every Programmer Should Know. And right at the beginning of the pandemic, during the first wave of lockdowns, myself and Trisha G finalized the 97 Things Every Java Programmer Should Know. And it is actually in this that I wrote a piece called Program with Guts, and you can actually find the original article is also available on Medium at the URL shown. Again, you can just Google that or search through my blog. So let's talk about testing, or rather, I mean, you're writing unit tests, right? Okay, so let's hope that that's not the problem that we need to encounter. The problem many people have is that they are not writing tests. They're not writing unit tests or any other kind of test. That is the majority of development. But at this conference, I'm going to expect that we're past that. That's great. We're writing tests. That's fantastic. The real question, though, is are they any good? It's a quality question. It's like any kind of question. The first step is, are we doing it? The next question is, are we doing it well? Do you have guts? Now, this term guts is taken from an observation from Alistair Cockburn a number of years ago. The modern programming professional has guts. Very many people say TDD when they really mean I have good unit tests. I have guts. The point here is that many people use the term TDD to refer to perhaps a better state of testing than they're used to. But test-driven development is a workflow. What I'm interested in here is regardless of your workflow, whether you TDD'd it or not, do you have guts? In other words, are they any good? Because that leads to the question that I ask in the piece that is included in 97 Things. Or have you landed someone, future you, with interest accumulating technical debt in their test base? And that's a real issue because sometimes people get trapped in this idea, I have tests and that's the end of the conversation. It's good. But what if we end up with unmanaged technical debt, not only in a code base, but also in our test base? What if our tests are actually slowing us down rather than speeding us up? In other words, they're having the opposite effect. What if they are a maintenance burden rather than a benefit to the team? So we need to get into the detail. What do I mean by good? Because obviously one person's good is not necessarily the same as another person's good. So let's pick on an example. Right, so what you see before you is a stack of pancakes in this case, but we're going to make it generic. There are a few features of a stack that we're interested in. A stack has depth. It has a top element. You can push things onto it. You can pop things off. Okay, so written in Java, although I will say all the observations I'm making today are generalized to other languages. I'll give you a very quick example later. We've got a stack of T. We've got a constructor. We've got a depth query. We've got a top query, and then we've got a push modifier and a pop modifier. Nice and simple, fairly straightforward. Now, the intuitive approach to writing tests, in fact, we could say it's the most popular approach. It's obvious, it's intuitive, and we're also going to discover it's completely wrong. It's this one, which is you take each method that you have, the constructor, the depth method, the top method, the push method, the pop method, and you have a single method, you have a test for it. And you just write test in front of it. Well, The first thing is that before we deal with the alignment question, the name is already a bit smelly because there's a duplication here. I mean, look at it. At test, test, constructor. We're saying test twice. Don't repeat yourself. The reader already knows it's a test. Why are you boring them with this extra noise? Okay. This is like putting get in front of a query method. It's noise. Okay. It's all of this stuff. We know it's a test method because it's in a class that's about testing. It's in a folder, probably marked test. The build will pick it up and test it. We know it's a test. Don't tell us what we already know. You can tell from the imports, JUnit and all the rest of it at the top. It's a test file. You don't need to bore your reader with this. Cut to the chase. Now, this is the problem. Sometimes when people understand that they don't want to use the word test again and they want to be more expressive, they end up with stuff like this. This is a classic test smell. Test constructor is correct. Test depth is correct. Why would you ever test it to not be correct? Again, these are noise words. They don't actually add anything. You always need to think about that whenever you are naming anything. Okay? What are you communicating here that we do not already know that deserves to be emphasized and shown to the reader? Otherwise, we're just using the bandwidth for noise. Okay? So of course we're testing for it to be correct. I mean, you wouldn't if you wouldn't write it for any other reason, then don't say it. And likewise, there's variations of this is okay, works, test constructor works. Again, I'm not going to test that it doesn't work. But also, sometimes people add extra words. Works as expected is one of my favorite ones that I've seen in a code base. And the point here is, well, yes, you're not telling me anything new. You're just adding words. A lot of names are not more expressive. They're just longer. So be very careful with this. It applies to production code and it applies to test code. Now, the next thing is that people kind of they're sensitive to that, and they kind of go, okay, yeah, I'm going to use a different style. Can be is a kind of classic smell that gets around this because all you've done is you've reframed. Notice the alignment is exactly the same: constructor, depth method, top method, push method, pop method. But now we've got extra words, and they're not. We're not just saying it's correct or whatever. They're saying can be or it has when we're talking about a capability or a property of some kind. Now, this certainly, it kind of doesn't quite look like the previous one, but it's just the same thing, redisguised. It's also not true. What do I mean by not true? Well, you know that when you actually have a stack, the stack can be empty, which means you can't pop from it, and it has no top element. So it doesn't always have a top element, and it can't always be popped. So these methods are not very helpful. Sometimes has top. Well, now we're just sounding vague. It makes us sound uncertain and unsure. Can sometimes be popped. Well, what do we mean? So we should really say what we mean. We should get away from this idea of aligning with methods. And I'm just going to tell you straight out, and feel free to contact me if you think I'm wrong, but I'm going to tell you that I'm not. You cannot do one method, one test case, one method, one test case, because in order to test the depth method, for example, you have to construct it. So you have to use a constructor in order to test the depth method. Also, in order to test the constructor, you need to be able to ask a question of it, such as it has no depth. So in other words, in order to test one method, you're going to need at least one of the others, at least. In order to test that pop works, well, there's multiple scenarios. There's popping when something is not empty and popping when something is empty. That's two scenarios. That doesn't belong in one test method. So you've already got two methods there just for testing pop. And by the way, to test pop when it's not empty, you're going to have to use the push method and you're going to have to use the constructor. So the point here is you can see this whole idea of aligning with methods is not just not helpful, it's actually fundamentally wrong. So what we need to do is reframe how we're thinking. Let us think about it in terms of stating propositions. Let us specify the behavior of a stack. What does that look like? Well, like this. A new stack is empty. An empty stack throws when queried for its top. An empty stack throws when popped. It's a bit difficult to read because obviously the names are longer. So let's try this. An empty stack acquires depth by retaining a pushed item as its top. Now notice how much more expressive these are. I'm not telling you I have a method. You can tell we have a method. It's in the class. I want to know about the behavior and the context of that behavior. How does this method behave when it's empty? How does it behave when it's not empty? These are the things you want to communicate. Now, it's typical in a number of languages and Java very strongly so, to follow a camel case convention. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't follow that for your regular Java production code, but I am going to suggest that test code is not regular production code. Switch to this. Use an underscore here. And you can see actually the spacing is going to be quite different. And of course, this is quite intuitive because we are now using sentences. We're using statements. We're using indicative statements that are logical propositions. When the test passes, it is a statement of confidence in that proposition, that it is true. When a test fails, it is the negation, it's the contradiction of that. These are very different to ordinary test methods, and you never call them, by the way. This is JUnit's responsibility. They are never called directly by you. So the names play a very different role. Now, we actually see that in JUnit 5, there is support for the idea of using underscores. It's reinforced. We have this annotation based on display name generation. We can replace underscores so that in the output, when you run this, you get this, replace the underscores with spaces. So we end up with some nice readable straight text. Now, the point here is I've shown this example in Java. I was basing it on the idea that it came from, or rather, the discussion starts with the 97 Things Every Java Programmer Should Know book. I'm using these techniques for many years in a variety of languages. So if I do it in C#, you know what? It looks the same. If I do it in Python with PyTest, yeah, the same. Again, I have to adjust conventions. I've changed everything needs to be prefixed with test. Here is an example where we need the keyword test because we don't have another annotation, but we're not repeating anything. We're stating it for the first time. And also I've changed throws to raises to be consistent with the idiom. I can do this in jest with JavaScript and TypeScript. The key point here is that it's the text that matters. And in fact, in jest, you actually get the really nice sense that it's actually strings. And you will find this in a number of testing frameworks that allow you to use strings rather than identifiers. But I'm going to leave you with one last consideration that moves it to something that is much more specification oriented. Let's rearrange this. Let's extract the commonality. Yes, we do end up with long names, but they're not arbitrarily long. They have commonality. In fact, let's extract the commonality here. When we look, we see that we have a number of operations that relate to empty stacks and a number that are related to non-empty stacks. So what we're going to do is we're going to group these together. We're also going to pull out a special one for a new stack. And notice when we structure it like this, we've now got a really nice reading. A new stack is empty. An empty stack throws when queried for its top. An empty stack throws when popped. An empty stack acquires depth by retaining a pushed item as its top. A non-empty stack becomes deeper by retaining a pushed item as its top. A non-empty stack on popping reveals tops in reverse order of pushing. That's great. That's a nice piece of formatting. This is straight text. What does that mean for the testing framework? Well, if I do this in JUnit, I just use nested. Okay. If I'm doing this in the other languages, they all support some form of nesting. It also leaves us with a very clear view of what is effectively a state model. This really is a specification. I have now emphasized the states and the behaviors and the transitions and how it works. So in other words, I am not simply writing tests to show that something works. I'm explaining to the reader and my future self and my future colleagues what I mean by that very simple but challenging statement. It works. What do we mean when we say it works? And we've got an explanation, a specification. So I hope that's been useful. So you're off to revisit some tests? Okay, I'll catch you later. So thank you very much for your time. If you are interested in following up on this, the original post that made it into the book, Program with Guts, is available on my Medium blog. You can contact me and connect with me any way you wish. And if you would like a copy of these slides, then you can find it here. I'll leave the QR code on the screen. And the shortened URL is t.ly uppercase HMF lower u uppercase F. So thank you very much for your time.